Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Reyhle, Senior Vice President of Business Development here at Acterys. We're going to talk through a number of things today. We're going to talk about current states to look out for, starting points, pitfalls, and then, of course, some best practices and some technologies that are available today that are really changing and altering and revolutionizing the landscape of enterprise planning. So to kind of kick things off, I already mentioned who I am. I've been with Acterys for a little over a year and a half. I have always been in the fintech reporting arena. I spent a decade in the treasury management arena. I've been in the procure to pay space. I now find myself here in the FP&A arena, although this is not just FP&A. This is XP&A, extended planning and analysis. We're not just able to plan on financials anymore. We can plan on any part of the business. And obviously, there's a variety of different solutions out there that are tailored for each of those planning exercises. So we're going to talk a bit about that today. One of the common themes that throughout my career has always been, regardless of what point solution we are actually looking at, one of the biggest and first most common negative aspects of any of these point solutions is, oh, it does this thing for me, but the reporting stinks. And so that's kind of how we're going to kind of put those lens on today and look at things through those and through that aspect. And so to start off, just from a very brief perspective, we'll go through today's agenda. So we're going to cover a lot today, but first and foremost, we're going to talk about your starting point or an organization's starting point. What are you coming from in terms of then being able to say, okay, I want to enhance, upgrade, improve what we're currently doing. Well, the starting point of your organization and where your data resides specifically is a very, very important aspect of determining how to best move forward. We're going to talk about some of the platform pitfalls to avoid. So obviously now you determine your starting point, but now what are some of the pitfalls? We're going to cover those today as well. And then we'll talk about, of course, the benefits and the real world success stories that have occurred from taking a more advanced modern approach to planning. And then we're going to do a little bit of a demo in terms of showing what we do here at Acterys in the terms of converting and enhancing one of the most prevalent business intelligence tools, Power BI, namely, into the most versatile, robust planning platform that provides that structured flexibility that a point solution simply is typically unable to deliver. So we'll kick things off here pretty quickly. And oh, by the way, please, throughout this presentation, if there are any questions, please post them into the Q&A section of this webinar. If we have time at the end, we will certainly address them. If not, for any reason, we will certainly address them after the fact and appreciate any participation from any of our attendees here across the board. So to get started, let's go into determining the starting point of your organization as it pertains to dressing your planning platform, solution, processes, etc. So some very basic high-level points here. And we're looking at this through business lens more than technical lens, but you'll understand why here as we go through this, because it's the business that needs the solution. And so first and foremost, lots of disparate data. I don't think any organization does not have this issue. The question is, where is it? And how accessible is it? And at what stage are you in terms of being able to leverage that data? Another starting point to definitely consider is organizing that data. Have you already got your information at least cataloged? You understand where it is, but perhaps you haven't organized it yet. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then maybe perhaps you've gotten past both of these. You know where your disparate data exists. You've got to a point where it's organized, but is it structured? Is it warehoused? Is it optimized? And how often is it being refreshed across all of those disparate sources? Because some data might be stale, some data might be up to date. And again, how can you know and understand comprehensively the state of your data before you even begin to start thinking of the planning aspects of this? So let's look at some traditional reporting architectures first. So this is a great slide because I like using it in terms of really kind of helping organizations understand where they sit in this journey. So the first thing that starts is on the left-hand side. We were just talking about it, disparate data. where does my data reside? So it can be within solutions like an ERP system, a CRM, HCM. You may already have it within separate databases, access databases, SharePoint folders and drops. Where is the data? That's the first question any organization needs to ask. And even if they have a planning solution currently and are looking to enhance it, you absolutely need to understand where is the data. From there, how are we making use of that data? Well, option one here, for probably a lot of people, has always been the case in some organizations, still might remain the case in some organizations, is still being used even if a planning solution is in place. And that is the old-fashioned, let's export the data into Excel. So this is manual. This is where I have a source system with data. I need to meld it with some data somewhere else in the organization. I don't have automation set up. I'm just going to grab it. I'm going to dump it into Excel. I'm going to start working on it. This is what has led to a lot of organizations now being mired in what's becoming more and more referred to as Excel hell. So that's option one. Some organizations still find themselves here. And what is the option two? Well, okay, we've gotten a little bit more advanced. We're now getting the information directly from these source systems. They may have an automated export feature or maybe a Power BI adapter, whatever it might be, but we've figured out a way to at least kind of automate the data from my source systems into a business intelligence tool. I can schedule those imports. Maybe some are API driven or utilizing direct query. I don't have a centralized location where I'm housing all this data, but I'm at least to the point where I've got some automation in terms of this data flowing into the environment that I need, be it in this case, a business intelligence tool. So that's kind of the second wave of maturity in terms of I've just simply exporting into Excel. Okay, I've gotten a little bit better here. I've got a business intelligence tool that's ingesting data from my source systems directly in some sort of scheduled automated fashion. Some might be manual, but at least it's a bit better than just the manual export to Excel. What's the third option? Again, these are high level. There's probably plenty of flavors in between some of these, but we're trying to, again, capture that starting point for the organization. Option three is the more mature, larger organizations that have already undertaken the effort to say, here's all the different sources of data in my organization. I need to put it into a singular source of truth or a data warehouse from which I can then carve out reporting environments from one location. So I already have all the integrations done. I've got them scheduled. I've got a very organized sense of the data flowing into a data warehouse or a data model from there. And that's what I'm using my business intelligence tool against. So instead of going direct to each individual system with my business intelligence tool, I only have to go to one spot. It's that data warehouse, data lake environment where I can carve out consolidated data from across all my systems. And that's what I'm plugging my business intelligence tool into, to, of course, then my end users receiving reports and ingesting that information. So again, in a spirit of identifying our starting point, this is high level, but again, gives you the idea of where do I sit within this organization, and in terms of the data mapping and the reporting capabilities therein. So pitfalls. So we've talked about the starting point. So we have working on organizing data. So thank you for some of the comments that are coming in here in lieu of the poll results being available. So we've talked about the starting point, right? And so obviously of those three options, a lot of shades of gray. There could be a combination of those three options. But once we have that determined, we kind of understand the landscape of the information and data that we need to effectively plan across the organization. Now let's talk about the pitfalls to avoid that in terms of selecting and putting a solution in place. So three, again, high level. This is informative. High level, rigid checkpoints. So we don't want to have steps that create dependencies and delays in what we're currently doing. You want to understand what's working in your current process. And you don't want to disrupt that if you don't have to. You also don't want to enter a situation where you have a lack of structure, where the data is not universal, it's not vendor specific. So you might know where the data is, but has it become relational? Does it know how to interact with data from other systems that might be coming from a different model or a different database entirely? And then from a legacy tool perspective, I mean, we don't want to have inflexibility or be married to something from a black box legacy perspective where we aren't able to get at the information that we need. And we certainly don't want to add another layer of legacy tools to our planning apparatus if we don't have to. So let's talk about each one of these real quickly. From a rigid checkpoint perspective, you don't want to shortchange your organization's need for flexibility, right? I mean, no two companies are planning identically, much less operating identically. So this is again, you want to avoid that rigid nature. If you have to adopt new software and new processes in parallel, that can be a recipe for failure if you're not prepared. One of my favorite analogies is you build houses and you've been building houses for years with a hammer. Well, guess what? We don't need to use a hammer anymore. There's an upgraded tool called a nail gun. Piece of cake. Let's just give all of our guys a nail gun instead of a hammer. And well, it's not that simple. You might need to invest in goggles. You might need to have a new training program in place to how to use that nail gun. You might have to now adjust all of the forecasted project timeframes in terms of how long it takes you to build houses because you now have the efficiency of a nail gun. So it's never as simple as just upgrading a tool and enjoying the benefits of that tool, especially when we're talking about large organizations and the complexity that lies therein. So keep this in mind, regardless of what tool you're replacing. In this case, of course, a planning solution. Point solutions. One of the most common things I've heard throughout my career, whether it was in treasury management solutions, whether it was in procure to pay platforms, the reporting stinks. It does this thing for me, but I can't get the reports out of it that I need. Or I've had to reformat my processes internally to fit this particular piece of software and how it operates. Point solutions will deliver pointed user experience and pointed workflows. This inevitably leads to forced changes into how you operate. And maybe you need to. Maybe a change is in order. Maybe it's going to be an upgrade, but it's no guarantee, especially if you're having to conform to an external solution, pointed solution that operates in one specific manner, solving one specific problem. As we mentioned before, no two businesses operate and report identically. So this can also lead to that challenge of rigidity across the organization in terms of choosing that upgraded solution for your planning exercises. So ideally, the platform offers the flexibility to easily conform to your business's specific processes and workflows. That's key, right? You don't want to have to reinvent your internal process wheel if you don't have to. You'd rather upgrade the tools and the platform and the solution that we're collaborating on that takes away and removes a lot of the manual labor that is very time intensive and removes us from the value added work that we could be doing on analysis. We don't want to have to reinvent everything else. So again, on the rigid checkpoint side, some quick points there on that particular pitfall that we want to avoid. The next pitfall was lack of structure. So lack of structure. The data is not universal. It's not vendor specific. Maybe it's even dated differently from a transactional perspective in those logs within those systems. So it's extremely important to strike that balance of structured flexibility. What does that term really mean? Because you get a lot of structure with a point solution. It's locked in structure. That's where you're missing the flexibility. Well, Excel has tremendous flexibility, but there's no structure. So we want to find that healthy balance, that marriage between the structure that we need as an organization so that we know everybody's operating in a similar function, inputting their data, viewing their reports, contributing, again, in a consistent manner. But we want the end user to also have the flexibility to use the tool, to create their own scenarios, to be able to conduct their own analysis without stepping out into that Wild West world of what did somebody do? What did somebody change? I have no idea how this data has been manipulated. That is a death knell. for collaborative planning within a large enterprise. So you want to look for solutions that not only provide the planning capabilities, but they offer collaborated data management workflows. Pointed, so again, if workflows are locked and approval processes are not flexible, you're suddenly now having to again change your internal processes based on the solution that you've chosen. So it's very, very wise to always lift up the hood and understand exactly how configurable the workflows and approval processes in these solutions can be tailored to your current state. Maybe you don't need 5 layers of approval. Maybe you need 2. Maybe you want other parts of the business to weigh in to your plans, and they're going to have to understand a new workflow and a new front end tool. These are all things that you want to make sure you're making yourself aware of, because in order to maximize the effectiveness of planning, you want to maximize the level of collaboration you can have across the business. It's not easy to do if everybody's having to change processes and learn a new front end tool. So avoid the black box, right? You want the business users to have the capability to manage the data and workflows directly within the system. So, hey, there might be a piece of data that we need to check and make sure it's accurate. Does the solution allow for that? Is there a data management component to the solution? And of course, the workflows surrounding that. The more black box it is, the more reliant you're probably going to be on external expertise or consultants to address any of these questions for your business. And you certainly want to have as much autonomous control over the solution as possible, as opposed to having to have that lingering potential need and cost for external resources managing your planning solution. So legacy tools, which we obviously a common theme here, we want to kind of avoid that, but the more open the architecture and the model of the data, the less reliant you are on that external expertise. So if it's based on, very familiar tools, or the back end is a database structure that's familiar and not obscure, I have a lot more pool of individuals, of talent. Maybe I have it even in-house, that now I can actually manage and keep this platform as up to date as I need for my business without having to experience delays or rely on external resources. Is the platform going to help you with AI readiness? This is a new term that we've latched onto quite heavily here at Acterys, because AI is only as good as the data that it's leveraging. And not just the data that it's leveraging, but the model that data resides in. Is that model relational? Is it bringing in my data from disparate systems and giving me an environment where AI will easily be able to determine what I've built? Is it something obscure? Is it black box? Is it AI that I can bring in from a third party and apply to this data set? These are all great questions to ask if you're exploring using AI. AI readiness is going to be a big theme, I believe, in 2025, because we've all spent 5 to 10 years hearing marketing rhetoric about AI. And I think we're all still waiting to see the actual proof in the pudding, so to speak. And this is what I think is causing some of that delay. So the focus is going to turn more on, why can't my organization be leveraging AI? Data readiness, making you AI ready, is a big component of that. So that's a big question to ask, of course, on the planning side, where AI would be leveraged quite heavily in terms of generating forecasts or what if scenarios, et cetera. And then, of course, legacy tools are undoubtedly, they're going to flow into the planning. See, you have legacy tools already. You might have a legacy solution or a platform or a database sitting somewhere, and it's housing data that needs to flow into your planning solution. So why would we add yet another point legacy solution to this mix? It's kind of compounding the issue that we have in the first place if we're adding yet another legacy solution to help us plan with legacy data. So let's talk about the benefits. What are some of the benefits of upgrading the planning platform? Now, this is pretty kind of rhetorical, because we wouldn't be talking about this in the first place if you didn't already understand why you need help or an improvement or an enhancement to your reporting ecosystem. So let's talk about some of these things here, right? Enhanced collaboration across departments. If you have the right solution, and it's not just a point solution in a box for an FP&A professional. It should be flexible. I like to envision the modern day planning solution is like an octopus with tentacles, right? And that those tentacles can go to anywhere in my organization and be used to retrieve the data that I need for my planning exercises. If I'm planning from an HR perspective, if I'm planning from a project management perspective, if I'm planning from good old fashioned finance planning and analytics perspective, I need tentacles that get me the data that I need. And if it's not in a system somewhere, that means it needs to come from a human or somebody, a department head, a plant manager, a project manager. And how can I extend them something makes it very easy for them to give me the data that I need to complete my planning. Sometimes it's just not going to be available in a system. And sometimes that human information is almost as more valuable than the system data. But is it easy to get? And when it's provided, is it placed in the proper area for you to make analytical sense of it? Very important to ask these questions from a collaboration perspective. Planning means I need to have inputs from everywhere in my organization, and it's not just systems. It could be humans. Scalable and agile planning, right? So are we able to upgrade and create brand new scenarios and shock things and on the fly? Hey, we've got our forecast and we're all collaborating on it. But me as an end user, I've got some ideas. I've got some creativity that I want to apply to this. But I don't want to interrupt the forecast or the budget that's in flight that everybody else is leveraging. Well, how easy is it for me to create that sandbox? How easy is it for me to recreate that forecast locally, make those changes, and apply those ideas and strategies that I have in my head, see how they impact those forecasts, those budgets, and then be able to decide if it's something that I want to escalate beyond my own analysis. Does the tool allow for that? It should be an identical end user experience, whether I'm collaborating on the corporate forecast or I'm actually tweaking my own sandbox of that forecast to do some of my own creative analysis that I may want to bring up into that collaborated forecast. Data accuracy and efficiency. Obviously huge, very a little bit redundant. We all know that we need to have data accuracy and efficiency. Is that a separate process? Is that in a separate system? Is it an IT function that you have to submit a ticket for to get some data repaired before you can actually trust your reports? Or does your platform allow the business user to collaborate on the data management component? This is a big part because, again, whether it's external expertise or I have to go internal to my IT department before I can trust the data in my plan, these are delays. These are causing choke points. And you want to be able to seamlessly manage this independently on your own as much as possible. And then the future proofing of technology, right? And this fits around everything that we've been talking about so far. Am I going to have to upgrade this? Is this database model going to become extinct someday or legacy in and of itself? Is the front end tool that I'm training my whole organization on, how long is it going to be not only around, but in its present form before an upgrade or new training is going to have to occur? And especially going back to that tentacle theme, the users at the end of my tentacles that are just giving me the data that I need, we don't want to interrupt their user experience. So we want to future-proof this to make sure that we're all going to be able to use it as long as possible without being beholden to a point solution providers, upgrades, whims, changes that are going to affect all of their clients, including you. So talk about some real world success stories in terms of how we have taken what we've talked about so far and really kind of turn the table upside down in terms of how organizations have actually not only applied and used a solution, but how they think about it. And that's where a lot of this content is coming from. So we'll start with one of our big success stories from 2024 was Urban Energy. This is a solar company retrofitting roofs for solar power generation. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reading through all these slides. I think a lot of these are available on our website for further study. But in a nutshell, what these folks did is they had data very disparate. Accounting system data separate from project management data, separate from payroll data. And in order to truly make sense of where they sit in a project before they hit the budgetary wall, so to speak, they needed to blend the components of all three. So finance data, now great, I've got that in my planning environment. Now I've got the project management data planted in there as well, relationally to the finance data. And then I'm also going to bring in that payroll data, because what I want to ultimately do, I've got folks out in the field working on multiple projects. I need to understand how much of that payroll is allocated to this one project that they happen to be working on in comparison to the project plan, in comparison to our financial data. This actually, parlayed itself after this first use case into a cash flow forecasting tool. Because now, once I have all this information intact, now I can start leveraging it to really start understanding the cash flow component in terms of how often I get paid, how late certain vendors are paying me, or fill in the blank. All of this information now blended into a relational model allows this company to have that real-time visibility that they were grossly lacking before they had the tool. So this is kind of a project management, finance, payroll example. Another one, more straightforward, was Namit. And you can see in this case, just the quote at the bottom is, speaks 1,000 words, but they're 5 to 10 years ahead of where they would have been before they used Acterys. And by the way, we're going to get a sneak peek here of Acterys here in a second. But again, this just speaks volumes. They're cutting down financial port creation from hours to 9 minutes. Very specific measurement in terms of how much time they're saving on just the blocking and tackling of getting to a point where they can trust their reports and trust their data. Superior plus propane. This is one of my favorites because it goes to that tentacle example that we were talking about earlier. So Superior plus propane, they had a very specific challenge in that they had field technicians out in the field measuring data and really no executive visibility. It was taking the executive team over 2 weeks to get static reports across what was taking place in the field. So they needed to fix that issue. They needed more real-time dynamic visibility across their business. And so with a planning solution like Acterys, each of those field technicians is able to leverage the solution as a Power BI report right on their tablet. It shows them exactly what they need to know before they go into a site, and then it gives them the ability to input the results of their visit. And that input goes immediately into the planning environment that is firing the executive dashboards in real time. So again, a tentacle, right? The planning team needs to know what's going on in the field in this particular case. How can I get that information right now when I need it the most so that I can make decisions for my business? This is a solution. And you're going to see some examples of that here shortly. So we're going to pivot into now a brief presentation of the Acterys platform. And a lot of the themes that we've been talking about in terms of current state to pitfalls to avoid, all the way to some of the benefits that we can enjoy. You'll understand this is all going to come together here as we kind of go through some of the examples that our solution can solve. Before I show the solution, let's talk about what it is behind the scenes. And one way to do that very effectively is we're going to go right back to this 3 options of reporting that we will see and we talked about earlier. So are we manually going from, these solutions into Excel? Do we have some sort of integration going into a business intelligence tool? Do we already have a data warehouse where we can now leverage the information in a consolidated manner with our business intelligence tools? The main thing that you see in this slide as it pertains to this part of the presentation is all of these arrows are going to the right. This is a read-only model. Data is on the left. Consumption is on the right. And that is pretty much the case for any just business reporting solution. I can see things, but I do not have the ability to interact. Think of Salesforce, for example. I like to pick on this because it's an easy example for most people to understand. Great platform, became the most powerful CRM this industry has ever seen. Imagine if the arrows in a Salesforce example only went to the right. It'd be read only. I can't create new deals. I can't create new opportunities. I can't put information back into the model. I'm only able to view it. That's what would happen if you did not have the ability to send data back from the end user perspective on the right. But that limitation is very prevalent in the planning world. I've got my data, I've organized it, and I can now present it. But that's where that's where it ends. When you add Acterys specifically in this particular example, notice how this changes. The key component here is the arrows between the end users on the right are now bi-directional. So now I'm not only just able to view the information that has been made available to me from my source systems, but I can now interact with that data as an end user. Now, before people get a little nervous about that, a lot of times an IT professional will say, what are you talking about, letting people write back data through their business intelligence reports? Notice that the write back is not coming all the way back to the source systems. It comes back to a staging layer database. So this staging layer database can now be the replacement for manual exports to Excel. It's also a replacement for, individual integrations from each source system into my business intelligence tool. Now my source systems are planting their data into the data warehouse or a SQL database. That data is specifically tagged as read-only data. We are never going to allow an end user to write back over any of that source data. What the end users are able to do is comment on it, or they're able to create a new scenario based off of those actual numbers called forecast version 1, 2, budget version 5, or scenario error. That can be created dynamically directly from an end user. They now have that write back scenario at their disposal where they can make those changes we were discussing earlier. So I want to say product A is going to increase in sales by 20% next year. How would that increase my overall profitability? Well, I can do that. That's where that interactive write back really becomes incredibly powerful. And in that particular use case, it's called analytic write back. I'm changing something so that I can see what the new calculation would present. It's not system of record data. It's, again, analytic write back on the planning side. What happens if I change this? And if I don't want to affect an existing scenario, let me create one for myself and I'll do my experimental work there. But again, we're never going to be writing back over actual data that flows in from my source systems. So from that perspective, now that I've kind of gotten that point across, let's go to an example. So I'm going to come out of my PowerPoint presentation here, and you should all now be seeing my screen. And for those that aren't familiar with or don't realize I'm in, this is Power BI. So the beauty of Acterys is the sense that we built our planning technology, planning apparatus, data model, all within and on top of very familiar tools and architecture. SQL database behind the scenes, Power BI as the front end that you're seeing here. You can even utilize Excel, which we'll talk about here a little bit as well. The difference being is we have supercharged this environment with Acterys's write back capabilities that convert this entire apparatus into the most versatile planning solution, offering the most structured flexibility that you will find in any solution in the market. Why is this? So first and foremost, I'm in Power BI. I click on the edit button up here at the top, and here are all those stock visuals that come with Power BI. Notice we have some teal colored visuals that we have downloaded straight from the Microsoft source. We have downloaded them into our Power BI environment. And a number of these visuals are going to allow that write back component that an end user can now interact with the data, send data, collaborate with commentary, all of that bi-directional traffic coming back through these reports from the end user is what Acterys is bringing to the table. And there's a variety of examples that we'll cover here very quickly today. But again, to kind of get that point across that you want that structured flexibility at your disposal. So in this particular report here, one of the most basic planning examples that we can use, which is good because we want to keep it simple in terms of showing what you can do with the data. The data is less relevant than what I can do with it once it's in this environment. But for just as a quick overview, we are modeling retail sales of laptops. So I'm a retailer, I'm selling laptop computers, and I want to look at what I've done in the past and then start doing some planning or some modeling or some what if scenario building on what could happen in the future. So what you can see over here on the left very quickly is that comparatively, I am using my actual data. So the data that flows in from the left side of the diagram, coming from my point of sale system or my ERP system, wherever that data resides, it's coming in and giving me the actual data that has happened across the organization. What I've done is I have created a model called Acterys. And this is the model that I'm using to do manipulations, to do my what if scenario modeling. And perhaps we're using it collaboratively, but I can have an unlimited number of different budgets, plans, forecasts, scenarios, and they can all be created directly right here within the solution. For now, though, let's talk about what we're using on this screen. So I've got my KPIs of total revenues, total quantity sold, what's the average unit price across everything that I'm selling, and then how is that comparing the model to my actual data? And that's what you're seeing here represented in the graphs, the delta between the two, again, represented here at the bottom. So now it's time to start playing around. I'm going to come over here to my right side, and this is the first of many write back visuals that Acterys brings into the equation, and it's our matrix write back visual. So I can simply change numbers and then immediately see the impact of those changes. So let's imagine that next year we want to, pretty much liquidate the ZenBook Elite. We've got a lot of them in stock. We're not going to make any more of them. We're going to try and just get rid of them next year. So what would that look like? Well, first off, it means that I'm going to sell a lot more of them. So I'm going to click on the button in this visual. Again, this is where the write back piece is being introduced to this environment. It's no longer read only. But I'm going to come down here to the ZenBook Elite, and instead of 12 being sold in January, we're going to say 50. Instead of 12 being sold in February, we're going to say 75. And then to save some time and to also demonstrate that we have a number of shortcuts for data entry in the system, I'm going to use the letter R100, and it's now going to populate 100 in perpetuity to the right for the rest of the year. Great. So I've just changed and modeled an increase in how many of these elites that we're going to sell. Now, normally, to save time, I'm not going to do this, but I could go now and change the price of the Elite and say it's going to be a lot cheaper next year because we're liquidating it. But for now, I'm just going to hit save, and I'm pushing those quantity increases back into the Acterys model at the database level. And now watch how all of my overall KPIs are recalculating in real time to reflect how that would impact my revenues compared to actuals. How it will impact my total quantity sold compared to actuals. And then, of course, least but not last, the average unit price. So now you just saw those updates hit. So now my model has recalculated a new increase to revenues. Obviously, quantity has gone up as well. And all of that is immediately reflected by me as the end user writing back to the Acterys model at the database level, those inputs that I've created, and then seeing the immediate result of those recalculations. That is the most basic example of the write back that we offer, in the sense of we're not doing this locally. We're doing this at a single source of truth that has already ingested my actual data from all my source systems. And now I've taken a copy of those actuals, created a scenario called Acterys, and that's where I'm doing my write back. That's where I'm manipulating my numbers so that I can now see what happens comparatively compared to what's happened in the past. So that's one quick example there in terms of just the basic write back from a very basic demand planning, retail forecast planning perspective. Lots of other examples here just to very, very quickly demonstrate, hey, I want to create a brand new model. I'm tired of working on this Acterys model. I want to create something new. Or maybe I've got colleagues and we're collaborating in this Acterys model. I'd like to create a sandbox for myself. Well, another write back visual that Acterys brings to the table is called our copy edit visual. This is now going to allow us to create brand new data in bulk at the database level directly here within Power BI. Right here, you can already see a menu of all the different plans, scenarios, budgets, etc., that are already existing within my environment. I'm simply going to say, I want a new one, right? And we're just going to call this planning X for lack of a better term. I'm just going to hit the save button here. We'll do just a very quick Power BI refresh, which does not have to be manual, by the way. But when I come back into my report now, if I scroll down in alphabetical order, we should see Planning X. Thank you. I now have a brand new environment, again, at that database level that I have created. And look, it's a bunch of zeros. Well, great. If I want to do zero-based forecasting or zero-based budgeting, that's fine. I've now got a new environment for which I can hit edit and I can start updating the information across the report. However, most organizations don't want to start from zero. So I'm going to go back into this same example. And now instead of creating the new scenario at the top, I want to give it data. So I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm simply going to say I'm interested in creating a brand new scenario. I'm going to use the naming conventions at that SQL database level that allows me to very easily say, I want to grab all of my actual data. Or maybe it's a data from a previous forecast or a different model or a scenario in the system. Doesn't matter. I can leverage it however I'd like, but I want to use that data to populate my newly created Planning X scenario. So I'm just going to quickly do a save of that, execute the copy of that data, put a couple of seconds to finish the job. And we will now come out of this, and you will notice Planning X, which I just created from scratch, which was a bunch of zeros, has now been populated with a copy of my actual data. So that fast, that quick, that easy, right within the familiar environment of Power BI, I just created a brand new scenario from scratch, populated it with data, leveraging the data that already exists within that database, and I now have yet another playground with which I can do analysis. So just another example there of another write back visual. Now, workflow. Okay, this is great, but now I want people to contribute, and I'm their manager, and I need to know when they've inputted their information, or just need to have some level of workflow to facilitate all these planning activities across my organization. Well, in this particular case, I am in the planner's environment here. And let me just do a quick refresh on this. And you'll notice in this particular case, up here in the top right, I am logged in as David Moore. Okay, now David Moore is a partial access planner, and he's going to go in and he's going to contribute now to the Acterys plan. So David, again, role level security, all sorts of permissioning around what you can see, what the end user can actually write back and change. All of this is very much controlled with a very sophisticated business user-friendly administrative portal. But David, from an end user perspective, he's only going to see the products he's responsible for. He doesn't need to see anybody else's products. And his job is to come in here, just like we were seeing before, and in this matrix write back visual, he needs to update his model across his different products. Notice, comparatively, he is not able to change this data. It's locked down. It's actual data. So we are not allowing end users to write over actual data. He is able to write over from a permissioning perspective to the Acterys model only for the products he's permissioned to see. So he comes in, he makes his changes, he updates his plan. At the end of the day, he's done, but he needs to notify his manager. Over here in the bottom right is another write back visual that Acterys brings to the table. It's our table edit visual. Now, table edit visual can be used to change anything. It doesn't have to just be a workflow status. It could be a product line, or the color of a product, you name it. But in this particular instance, we're using it to facilitate workflow. So David has put in his updates. He has committed them. But now he's going to come over here, and instead of being in progress, he is going to change his workflow status to submitted. Simple enough. Table edit visual. Just updated this table and this value with the submitted versus the in progress. So he saves this. This is going to fire off an email to the manager, letting them know that David has effectively submitted his Acterys model or his forecast. He could even, because we're integrated throughout the Microsoft stack, click and send a Teams message right away to his manager right from this report. Regardless, the manager is going to be alerted, and the manager screen is going to look quite a bit different, because the manager is going to be seeing everything across the people that they're managing, not just David's information or just theirs. So the manager is Priya, full access. And now she can see across her team who has submitted, who's still in progress, and then she can decide if the submission from her people is confirmed or not, which again triggers off another wave of automation that our clients can configure. Does this freeze the forecast now? Does it do any? I mean, again, build the automation straight from these tools that are very familiar, that most folks are familiar using with already. So that's an example on that front there. Now, with only 10 minutes left, I want to do another five more minutes of some examples here, and hopefully we can have a little bit of time for some Q&A here at the end. But just so everybody can understand the multi-purpose aspect, when you have this level of flexibility, there is virtually nothing that you can't tackle or solve with this level of platform, because planning can mean anything, and it can mean planning across what part of the business. Here's an example of sales and ops, right? In terms of measuring how much usage or when we're going to be at a capacity shortage, or in terms of opening up a new shop and what's the inventory requirements going to be, and how long are, in this particular case, we're a bicycle manufacturer. So how often and how long and how many days of usage are occurring across all of the bikes that would be used or made for sale or for rent within that given store? And I can, of course, come in here and say, you know what, the average daily use of bikes is going to change. And I have the write back capability, again, to make those changes and see how it might impact from a sales and operations perspective. We even have insurance claim examples where I'm tracking premium payments. I'm tracking claims that are being made against insurance policies. And once again, you can see if I'm modeling or viewing actual data. I can see if I'm looking at premiums versus claims. But again, another very configurable dashboard that can be built right within the solution and really tailored to the client's specific needs. Because again, this is not a point solution. This is a platform that can be designed to accomplish any particular planning scenario, as long as we have the data on the left, coming into a data model in the middle, and then giving these very familiar tools of Power BI and Excel the capability to write back and collaborate from that single source of truth. So for whether it's insurance claims, whether it's, let me get my here, here's an IT asset management dashboard. So where are all my servers? Where are my tenants? Where are the workspaces that are being supported by all this infrastructure? Yet another planning example, now from a tenant inventory perspective, that would be used by an IT professional to manage, again, tenants, servers, tags. The most traditional, the XP&A. So this is a fun screen here because this is going to show you a right back visual that is now graphic. So a graphic right back visual, which allows us to say, hey, the dark line is my actual data. The light line is my budget or my forecast, which you can see up here leveraging the slicers from Power BI. But I just want to hit the edit button. And now I can see that 26.5 is my total. And how does that dynamically change when I'm moving data points around? Now I'm not typing into a grid. I'm simply graphically changing data from this chart, watching it dynamically update my budget compared to my actuals in real time. And I can take it even a step further. Perhaps I have to deliver 34,000 units. Doesn't matter how poorly or well I do in a given month. I can freeze that. And then notice the 6K when I adjust this 5K. Every data point is now recalculating to reflect that my total of 33.9 needs to stay intact despite the movement of one data point. And of course, all of these algorithms, all of this is configurable behind the scenes because, again, we're leveraging SQL, Power BI, Excel, and a star schema data model behind the scenes. So extremely accessible to let organizations truly take control of the environment just based on using these very common tools. Even from an HR perspective, this is kind of like, now I'm an HR and we want to plan our HR expenses, headcount, salary across the organization. Here's a dashboard allowing me to do that. Now, again, where did the data come from? HR system, maybe payroll, and that's being brought into that environment. It's being put into a data model that makes everything relational. I'm now being presented with this data. Again, the one-way street. But now I want to make changes. So I can simply go into an edit mode of this report. And just from this screen right here, we're going to see a salary component by division by employee. And then down here is an employee master, where I could, again, because we're looking at a forecast scenario, not actuals, I can come in here and I can start making changes, whether I'm changing the name of an individual or the department that they're working in or the salary that they're making in a given month, or heck, I want to add an employee and to see what it looks like when I start adding employees to this for next year. How does that impact my financials? How does that impact my HR costs? This can all be done right here within this playground environment. We also have and just launched Smart Excel Visual. So just a quick spoiler, this is just launched. It's just going out into production. But one of the biggest challenges most organizations have that are mired in that Excel hell that we were talking about earlier is the Wild West. Once data gets into Excel, who knows what people are doing with it, where they're sharing it, how it's been changed or altered. And these different workbooks flying around cause a massive challenge. The biggest problem is not Excel. It's the way it's being leveraged. I mean, how many point solution vendors come and say, we're going to get you out of Excel? Well, it's not that you want to get out of Excel, it's that you want to get out of the Wild West of Excel hell. So bring Acterys' Smart Excel Visual into Power BI. Now the end user has Excel. They're used to Excel, but now I'm leveraging it from a single source of truth. And I'm leveraging it with permissioning, with an audit trail. And I'm able to write back. Notice the formula in this particular cell. This is an Acterys formula that is sending this data back into that centralized database and data model. Whereas other inputs, such as on the P&L side here, are just direct numbers and direct calculations that are coming from the inputs that feed into a forecast load sheet. A lot of our clients will take robust Excel workbooks that have been around for years and spend minutes to hours grinding away to get their information, and they pray to God the thing never breaks. Well, bring it into our solution. Import it into the Smart Excel Visual. Now you immediately have all this information and this workbook and your calculations in the staging layer database, and you can start creating the model directly through these tools, again, that everybody's familiar with. So again, the world is the oyster in terms of where we can leverage any of these number of visuals for collaborative commentary across teams, collaborating on plans, extending the Excel experience to end users. Instead of Excel hell, it's Excel hell yes, because now we can use the tool the way we want, as opposed to breaking things or bogging things down in an unaudited, uncompliant environment that we can never look at as a source of truth, because we don't know where the information came from or how it's been manipulated within the environment. So again, Excel's not the issue. It's just, it was never designed to be a data storage facility. It's designed to be an analytic tool. This is what really brings that vision to fruition, because we can now unify everybody from one central source of truth and give them this flexibility around Power BI. And if they're not even in Power BI yet, let's make it Excel, and let's make sure we're not skipping a beat in terms of not only enhancing our planning solution or upgrading it, but enhancing the way we all do our business, the way we manage software, the way we actually deploy and collaborate without forcing a pointed change down the throat of the organization. So I'm going to conclude there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We have 1 minute left. I apologize for not taking those last 5 minutes to address some questions. If you did leave a question, we will certainly be addressing them and following up directly. I thank everybody for their time today. I would love to connect with anybody after this, but in the meantime, enjoy the holidays. Thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to talking to anybody soon. Thank you very much.